Hey, I'm Dr. Tom Warren, and you're watching The Plant Doctor. What I want to go over today with you guys is what I'm going to be doing in my yard over the next 90 days in fall. So here where I'm at in North Alabama, the days are getting shorter. We're getting some cooler temperatures at night, and it's time to start transitioning the garden from summertime stuff into fall and what we will be doing in winter. So there's actually a lot of things that we need to be doing. There's a lot of things we don't need to be doing, and I want to go over both of those. But the first thing I want to talk about with you guys is mulch. How I mulch my yard in the fall is a little bit different than probably things that you're seeing on other YouTube channels or something that you may see in a publication somewhere. The leaves that are going to fall off of the tree, I let them fall down. Those that fall in the grass, I just mulch them with the mulch blade mower and let those leaves sit. Get them cut up really, really fine, because it is great natural fertilizer, and plus you're adding that organic component of decomposition in your soil layer when you do that as well. So you're enriching not only the soil chemistry, but the textural properties of your soil as well. The leaves that fall in the flower beds behind me here, what I'll do with those, I'm just going to leave them. I'm not going to do anything to them. And then once all the leaves are down off of the trees, I'm just going to put a layer of pine straw across the top of them to cover them up. I've been doing that now. I've been in this house for about 8 or 9 years now, and I've been doing that method for about 8 or 9 years, and it's fantastic. Some of the soil characteristics that I'm getting here, especially where I'm at, I have very, very sandy soil, so nutrients tend to leach out of the soil layer very quickly. But building up that organic matter and letting it decompose in my flower beds has been just fantastic for my plants. So the consider your mulching regimen as you enter through fall. One thing that we often forget about when we think about fall, it's time to start bringing in some plants. I have a lot of plants here on the patio and around the house that are in pots. I have lime trees, I have fiddly figs, uh, I even have some mandevillas that I think I may try to bring into the house this year. Go ahead and start moving some of those in, because a lot of those plants, they can't even take a minor frost. Some of those plants don't even like it when it gets down around 45 or 40 degrees, which we will have here in my area in the next probably 2 or 3 weeks. We'll have a temperature or two that gets that low. So it's time to start bringing in your potted plants that you have had outside all summer and store them for winter. One recommendation I would have before you bring those plants in, scout them for insects. And even if you wanted to go over the top of those with like a light insecticide or an insecticidal soap, just to be on the safe side, I would hate for you to bring in some sort of like mites or aphids or something else into the house and they make a mess on the floor or they get onto other indoor plants. So before you bring those in, just do a quick inspection for any type of insects that may be on those. It's getting time to dig up bulbs. Here in my area, a couple of bulbs that are very popular but need to be dug up are things like elephant ears and caladiums. You can store those in your garage and they'll be fine. Just what you need to do is put a little peat moss over the top of them, keep that somewhat damp. Don't keep it saturated, just keep a little moisture in there and they should be okay. Other things that some people will bring in are things like dahlias. So I'm very marginal with dahlias where I am. So if you were to draw an imaginary line, let's just draw a line across the United States, because that's where most of our audience is at. Say Raleigh, Chattanooga, Memphis, over to Little Rock, and then Dallas or somewhere in there north. You would want to dig up dahlias. Now, if you're south of that line, you're probably okay not digging them up. But let's give ourselves a buffer. I know I said like Chattanooga and Memphis. So if you're in between like Atlanta, Birmingham, Chattanooga, Memphis, it's kind of marginal. You may want to go ahead and dig them up. But I think if you're at like Atlanta, Birmingham, like Columbia, South Carolina, South, you should be okay leaving those dahlias in the ground. So just look up in your area, look at your horticulture zone. If you go to Google, type in USDA horticulture or temperature zone, it'll pull up a map, see where you're at on that map. And if you are zone 8, 9, 10, 11, you should be okay. But if you're like 7B, getting up into the 6s and 5s, you need to go ahead and dig up your dahlias. I'm in the process of deadheading my perennials this time of year. So the flowers have grown and they've matured into seed heads. A few exceptions on the deadheading. I do have some echinacea here behind me. I don't know if you can see them or not. I leave those up because the birds, in particular the American goldfinches, they come through every fall and they love those echinacea. I'll leave those up. So I'll leave up some seed heads for wildlife feed. But things like Shasta daisies that have little seeds, and I never see the birds interacting with those plants, I'll go ahead and start cutting those back. I'm not cutting off vegetation. I let all my perennials go dormant naturally. So once they go dormant, all I do is just put pine straw back on the top of them and leave them alone and let them come up the next year. The reason I don't cut back my vegetation is right now, those plants are still creating sugars in the leaves and they're storing sugars down in the roots for next spring's growth to come out so your plants can have that nice, fresh flush next spring. And I want to do everything I can to encourage that. A few exceptions to that rule, one being hostas. Hostas tend to, when they go dormant, their leaves they seem to be slow to decompose and they'll carry a lot of mold and fungus on them. I'll clean up the hosta leaves, but things that in my yard, like echinaceas and Shasta daisies and black-eyed Susans and pretty much anything else, the ornamental grasses, I'll let them go dormant naturally and don't worry about cleaning up the leaves. Here again, we're adding more nutrients to the soil by not taking that leaf material out of the garden and putting it out by the road. The more we can recycle our leaves in the garden, the better. It's also time to be putting out your spring bulbs. So things like tulips and narcissus that you want to have in early spring, now's the time to start getting those in the ground. For our friends further south, say you're in South Georgia, South Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, southern Texas, headed out that way. What you may have to do with your bulbs is start them in the refrigerator. You can usually check the box or the bag on your bulbs and it'll say if they're pre-chilled or not. Where I'm at, it doesn't matter if they're pre-chilled because we're going to get chilly enough in the winter that they're going to have enough exposure to cold to come up in the spring. But if you're further south, check the box, and if it doesn't say that they're pre-chilled, put them in the refrigerator. Let them get a chilling requirement, say 30 or 45 days in the refrigerator, and then bring them out and plant, and they should be okay. It's time to start transitioning your annual beds from summer plants to fall plants. I've got several beds with summer annuals in them right now. I have pots that have summer annuals in them as well. I'll be transitioning those out. It's time. My summer plants, they're done. They look leggy. I'm no longer fertilizing them just because the shorter days and the cooler temperatures, it's time for them to go to sleep anyway. So what I'll do is just slowly but surely start transitioning those to things like ornamental kale, ornamental lettuce, pansies, violas, snapdragons, and go from there. If you're going to transplant any perennials, now's the time to mark where they're at. Take a little flag or a piece of marking tape and flag where those plants are at, because what will happen, this happened to me 3 or 4 years ago. I've got several hostas in the back here, and I divide those out early spring right before they leaf out. I'll go and divide those out. So the first spring I did it, I didn't know where they were at. So what I'll do is the ones that I want to divide out, I'm going to put a marking flag beside those so I know where to go dig next February and March when those things are just starting to put their little buds up out of the ground. If you have pots that you have out in the summer and you're not going to use them during the winter, before you store them, I would encourage you to clean those pots. Either use some rubbing alcohol or mix up a solution of like 10 parts water to 1 part bleach, and clean those out so that if there's any viruses or bacteria or fungus growing on the sides of those pots and you bring them back out next spring, you're not introducing that to your new plant material. Because I know a lot of you guys, you spend a lot of money, several hundred, if not a few $1,000s every spring on having nice, fancy, showy plants for the house, and then they're in pots and then they're in baskets and other things. And the last thing we want to do is get those off to a bad start next spring by introducing a pathogen. So if you can go ahead and do some legwork now and clean up those pots with, here again, alcohol or a 10-to-1 water to bleach ratio, you'll be doing yourself a favor come next spring. Now is the time to plant. In particular, shrubs and trees. If you're going to plant shrubs and trees in your yard, late September, October, early part of November is just the primo time to do it. The plants, the metabolism in them, they're slowing down. They don't need as much water. You're not going to have to baby them as much. And so what we're doing, even though like a Japanese maple, for example, will go dormant, what we see happen is throughout the winter months, those roots, they'll slowly grow. Those roots will still move around in the soil a little bit. So those roots are getting established into the native soil. That way next spring, when you have that flush and new growth, those leaves come out, you've got the maximum amount of root ball in the ground to supply that plant with nutrients and water. So it's just a primo time to plant. The only downside to planting this time of year is this is historically our driest time of year going into October. You can see today is beautiful back here. There's not a cloud in the sky. It's 70 degrees, low humidity. But we have days like this day after day after day after day. So you may have to do some supplemental watering on those plants, but for plant health purposes, this time of year is the best time of year to plant those types of plants. The only thing I'm not looking to plant this time of year is something that would be marginal in my area. So there's some palms that are very marginal in my area. I would not plant a palm right now. I would do that in the spring. Some people attempt to grow citrus here, and that is extremely marginal where I'm at. I wouldn't plant it this time of year. I'd wait until spring to do that as well. But things that are not marginal in your area, go ahead and plant them right now because it is the best time to plant. Also, if you're going to the garden center and looking at plants, look for deals. This is the best time to find deals at the garden center. I did a video last year. I'll try to link it up here. I went to Lowe's and I bought perennials, 1 gallon perennials for 80 cents a piece. So a lot of these big box stores, what they're doing is the gardening season's over. They're getting in Halloween stuff, Thanksgiving stuff. I was in my local Lowe's the other day. It's September the 26th, so I was in there like the 24th or something like that. And they had doggone Christmas stuff in there. I mean, they're looking to get all that garden stuff out and move in the holiday season ASAP, and you can take advantage of that too. So go to your local retail garden center, go to the big box stores if you got a Lowe's or a Home Depot, and look for the sale rack, because I promise you, if you find it, you'll probably find some good deals. I mentioned earlier about deadheading perennials. On some of those perennials, what I'll do is I'll harvest the seeds. I'll take the seeds off of the perennials, I'll put them in a Ziploc bag, and I'll put them in the refrigerator, and I'll just store them in the refrigerator for about 30 to 60 days, somewhere in there, and I'll take them out and I'll just store them in the garage the rest of the winter. Next spring, I'll bring them back out and I'll plant those. I either put them in a pot or I'll put them in the ground out here. So if you want to harvest seeds, now's the time to do that. Depending on the species of plant that you are wanting to harvest, I would encourage you to Google that plant and just type in how to grow whatever you want to grow from seed. See if it needs what we call a chilling requirement for the seed. If it does, put it in the fridge for however many days you need to put it in the fridge, and then bring it out, and you should be good to go. If you have a fountain in your garden, it's time to start thinking about winterizing that fountain. This past spring, we put a fountain in back here in our backyard, and I thought I was going to let it run until like Thanksgiving, but I didn't realize at the time. I just didn't think about it. I should have realized it. It's under trees back here, and those leaves are going to start to fall sooner than later, and I don't want those leaves clogging up the pump in my fountain. So here in the next 2 or 3 weeks, what I may do is just unplug the pump, and I'll winterize that pump. I'll store it somewhere where it's not exposed to freezing temperatures. I'll stick it in the outbuilding or the garage here. But now's the time to start thinking about winterizing that pump. If they're not under trees, if your fountain's not under a tree, what you could do is let it run until we start to have freezing weather, and then you'd want to go ahead and winterize them. All right, let's talk about what I'm not doing. I'm not putting out any fertilizer. I do not want to encourage any type of new growth on my plants, because new growth this time of year, when we have the frost come, in my area it's going to be probably a month to 6 or 7 weeks, somewhere in there. It's going to burn back that new growth. And when you put fertilizer down, you're encouraging new growth. And so what you're going to see happen is that new growth will turn brown, it'll shrivel up, and your shrubs won't look as good as they could. I would also limit my pruning this time of year, because pruning encourages new growth as well. So when you prune, there's multiple buds that set behind where you made that cut, and those will want to put out vegetative growth. I do have some tea olives and some boxwoods that need a slight haircut. I'm going to cut just the tops of them off and just to square them up a little bit, and I should be okay. But I would not do anything much beyond that. Of course, if you have like a dead or a diseased branch or something like branches that are crossing over and rubbing on each other, you can cut those any time of year, because that's a plant health issue. But I'm not doing any sort of pruning outside of that. Also, it's still a little bit early to transplant. I'll transplant some trees and shrubs. I always do every year. I'll stick stuff in the ground. It's like, well, I want this over here, that over there. I'll wait till like December, January to do that, when it is very, very cold outside. Those plants are all but dormant. They're in a deep, for lack of a better term, hibernation state. And then we'll move them around then. It's just too early to be moving around plants and transplanting them right now. So if you can wait another 90 days on the transplant, I would recommend that. The last thing I want to talk about is turf care. I'm putting down my fall pre-emergence right now. I've mixed in a little bit of Trimec in the tank with that as well. If you want to watch the video on specifically what I do in my yard in the fall to prevent weeds, in particular poana grass, watch this video right here. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor, and until next time, happy gardening.